Okay, listen up, everybody. He's not only the most active blogger about Microsoft Access, but also our resident ambassador for the twinBASIC project. Today, he will show another way in which twinBASIC is going to be relevant for the Access developer community. Please send a warm welcome to Mike Wolfe.
Thank you, Philip. So, as Philip said, this is actually my fourth annual twinBASIC project update. I had the honor of introducing it when it first launched in its early alpha version 4 years ago, and I guess 3 years ago now. This is the fourth one. And the feedback has always been at the end of every session, how does this apply to us as Access developers? So this year, I want to try and dive a little deeper into how you can start using this today, because even though it hasn't reached version 1 yet, it's pretty much production ready for most things that you would want to do with it in Microsoft Access. So without any further ado, we'll get started. So as Philip said, my name is Mike Wolfe. I write a daily blog post at nolongerset.com. And I also do a week in review article, so you can get on the mailing list there. And I send out everything that happens in the world of Microsoft Access each week. Okay, so let's go through a quick outline of what we're going to cover. We're going to start with a brief overview of twinBASIC, a progress update from last year, highlight some of the development environment improvements, and then we'll jump into the demo. And I'm going to try and hit these first 3 points pretty quickly so that we can spend as much time as possible doing the demo. Okay, so if this is your first time here, or if you're not familiar with the project, twinBASIC is a fully compiled language. You can think of it as kind of Visual Basic 8, like VB8. So after Microsoft abandoned classic Visual Basic and moved everything to the .NET framework, the language has kind of languished for a few years. So Microsoft abandoned it, and Wayne is providing a way for people with VB6 projects to bring those over into a modern language. With that said, it's 100% backwards compatible, so it works with VBA and VB6. You can copy and paste your code. If it works in VBA, it'll work in twinBASIC, in addition to all of the new language features that have been introduced. Throughout these slides, you'll see these the links here. On the last slide, I'll show you where you can go to the website where you can download this slide deck, and you'll be able to hit all of these links and get more information. So there's just a brief list of some of the new features that are available, and we won't spend too much time on those. You can look at that later. Okay, so a brief progress update on the project itself. So over the past year, there hasn't been a lot of features within the language so much as a lot of work being done to really make it improve the stability both of the development environment, the compiler, and most recently some of the ActiveX controls. As you'll see, that's a big initial use case now. A lot of companies that have been maintaining VB6 ActiveX controls, Visual Basic 6 only created 32-bit controls. So there's a whole bunch of Access and other Office plugins that were written in VB6 that can't be ported over to 64-bit because VB6 doesn't have that support. So that's a big initial market, is to be able to take those existing projects and compile them for 64-bit use. So over the last year, one of the big things that the community has been working on is improving the documentation of the language. So this link here will take you to the twinBASIC, the official wiki, which goes into listing all of the new features, how to use some of the new syntax that's been introduced. And along the same lines of the community involvement, one of the things that new languages really need to survive and to thrive is a strong ecosystem. And so if you're familiar with the .NET framework or with Python, you have things like NuGet or PyPy, where you have package managers so that it's easy for developers to share add-ins and plugins with other developers. And so that's we're going to see an example of that when we get to the demo later. And the other big thing that we've seen over the past year is the proliferation of a bunch of community projects. Notably, Fafalone is a very active twinBASIC user. He has a lot of VB6 projects that he has been porting over to twinBASIC. So in addition to that, providing valuable sample projects for the community, it's also been a way to stress test twinBASIC, because he has several projects that are hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and that's one of the stability improvements that we're seeing with the development environment, is handling those very large projects. And in particular, his Windows development library, which makes it so that you probably won't ever have to write another declare statement in twinBASIC if you want to interact with the Windows API. Finally, this last link here will take you to the 12-month roadmap, and the tentative release date right now is October 1st of this year. The thing to keep in mind with this, you really only get one chance to make a first impression. So that launch, you want the language to be as polished as possible. Most of the functionality is already in place in the language. There's a few things that are missing: multi-document support, so you can have multiple windows open at the same time. There's a printer object. There's a handful of things that are missing in terms of features, but a lot of what's going into this now is burning through the bug list, making sure as many of those bugs have been fixed as possible, and getting it ready for a proper launch. Okay, so the development environment improvements. As I said earlier, the stability and performance wasn't so much an issue with smaller projects, but when you started getting into very large projects, the IntelliSense, because of the way that worked, that could sometimes slow down. The compiler or the development environment would crash after a few hours of use in very large projects. That all seems to have been fixed here in recent weeks and months. One of the other nice features, kind of going into this whole idea of supporting the developer user experience, is the introduction of a diagnostics window. So in the past, there was a problems panel, and it just showed you the errors, compile errors that were there. If there's a runtime error, they would show up in this problems panel. Well, that got overhauled, and now it's more similar, if you're familiar with Visual Studio environment, where you can toggle off and filter to show errors, warnings, hints, or just plain information about your running programs. The other nice thing, again, this is making that development environment, providing features that modern programmers expect out of a development environment. We wouldn't know anything about that as VBA developers, because our development environment hasn't changed in 30 years. But for the rest of the programming world, they want to see things like customizable layouts. So you can, if you're doing user interface work, you might want to have the form toolbox visible. If you're doing just pure code, you probably want to hide the form toolbox, and so you get as much real estate as possible on the screen to do your code work. And then if you're debugging, you probably want to have some of those diagnostic type panels open, the locals window, the call stack, those kinds of things. And so you can save all of those layouts, and you can easily switch between them. And then every command in the development environment is configurable with custom shortcut keys. And you can even create other custom shortcuts that will run expressions. So you can have a shortcut to insert the current date and time into your code if you wanted to. For me, this was one of the things that I noticed when I was last year, when I was doing a lot of work in twinBASIC, going from VBA to twinBASIC, is it just felt a little bit different, the IntelliSense. And it's hard for me to put my finger on exactly what it was, but I've got over 15 years of muscle memory built into writing VBA. And so all of those, control space and tab to complete IntelliSense autocomplete options, that was all just a little bit different. And again, it was hard to put my finger on exactly what it was, but that all seems to have been worked out and ironed out. And moving from developing in VBA to developing in twinBASIC feels much more natural now than it did a year ago. And the final thing is, again, going back to this idea of community support, is the option to do developer environment add-ins. So this is a little bit different than what we're going to talk about. This isn't VBA development environment. This is the twinBASIC IDE development environment. So Soken Queso has created a bunch of IDE add-ins, including an autosave add-in, a user control builder, a message box builder. There's a commenting add-in, and the one that he's working on now that as of a week ago hadn't been released yet, but it is due out soon, which is an external tools add-in. So you can configure things like if you wanted to have a version control software that you can launch with a button from within the development environment, that sort of thing. If you want to send a text file that you're working on into Notepad++ or VS Code. Okay, so like I said, I want to kind of blow through that first part and get to the demonstration, because I think this is the part that for Access developers, you're going to be most interested in. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to get started and get an initial proof of concept working. You can do this in under 2 minutes. That includes the download time of twinBASIC itself. We're going to customize the VBE add-in. So we're going to take the proof of concept and we're going to do something a little bit more useful with it. I'm going to show you how to call the Access app object from within the development environment add-in. This was a question that came up a couple of years ago at this presentation when I did sort of a whirlwind tour of how to create all these different add-ins and how quick and easy it was to do. One of the questions somebody brought up was, how do you gain access to the application object from within the development environment add-in? And turns out there's some hoops that you have to jump through, but luckily for us, somebody in the community already did that, so we're just going to be able to grab, copy, and paste that code and bring it into our add-in. The other thing, for this to be really useful, when you do the development in twinBASIC and you build it, it's going to automatically register and do everything that you need so that it's just available for you on your computer. But if you want to share it with a colleague or install it on a separate computer, maybe a home computer versus a development computer, you don't want to have to install twinBASIC everywhere just to build from the source code. So we'll show you how to take the DLL and register it on those other machines. And then finally, hopefully we'll have time to go in and I can show you that Windows development library and how we can use that to replace our declare calls in twinBASIC. Okay, so without any further ado, let's jump into twinBASIC. Okay, so I'm skipping the download just to save a couple minutes, but there's no installer. You just download it, you unzip, and you double click the twinbasic.exe, and it opens this up, and you'll also see the new project form when it opens. So we're going to go into samples, and we've already got a sample that's built into twinBASIC, and we're going to call this demo 2024. Okay, so at this point, all we're going to do is come up here and we're going to build this. It's going to ask us to save first, so we'll do that. We will save it in here, Twin project, and we're going to go ahead and build it again. Okay, so down here in the debug console, it shows what happened. It just created the output file. We've got a win64.dll, and it registered it. So now, if we go over to, if we open up Microsoft Access, and we jump into the development environment. And it looks like it's on my other screen, so give me just a second to bring that over. Okay, so this is the add-in that just got created. Okay, and see, it's already showing us the message box here. So hello world from twinBASIC. Okay, so as I said, in under a minute, we have a working add-in. So proof of concept is already complete. So now what we want to do is we want to do something useful with it. Okay, so we're going to close this out and we're going to come back over here. And so here's our tool window. We're just going to get rid of these existing controls that are on here. And you'll notice down here this diagnostics window. When I delete these controls, you're going to see some stuff pop in there. And it immediately does a compile in the background to see that it's missing some information. So we've got some code here that's referring to the stuff that we just deleted. So we're going to come in here, we'll delete that, and that cleans that up. So now what we're going to do, we're going to add a couple of text boxes here. Another one. Add a command button, and I'll show you what we're actually going to be doing here in a minute, but for now, just kind of bear with me as I go through this. And then the last thing I'm going to put in here is just a label with the version number, and I'm going to use my local time as the version number. And the reason that I do this is it's real easy when you're doing stuff with the registry and with DLLs. For if you forget to close out of access while you're actively developing this, and you try and build a new DLL, the DLL that's already there is going to be locked by the access process, and so it won't actually update. And so having a version number that you can easily see, especially when you're doing active development, can save you a lot of grief. I speak from painful experience with that. Okay, so we've got that here. Now you notice I didn't put any labels with these text boxes, and I did that for a reason. I wanted to highlight one of the new properties that I think is really pretty neat. I think if you've done web development, you've probably seen something similar to this, which is a text hint. So call this object class name. And so that fills in what we expect to get put into that text box. And this is going to be the collection class name. And then this other text hint always option here. So for the first one, we had it set to false, and for this one, we have it set to true. I'll show you how that works when we go into the back into access. Okay, so for now, we've got those two. Let's give these a useful, a better name. Okay, and we could rename this button, but we won't worry about that for now. So at this point, we really just want to do a proof of concept and make sure that this is working. So we're going to just show our object name. Okay, so one thing you may have noticed as I was going through and typing, when I hold down Control on the keyboard, it's a little bit hard to see, which is intentional, but there's some hints here. So this end sub, it's showing what that closing block goes with. So it goes with the command one-click subroutine. This class down here, my tool window, so it's showing what the end class line goes with. Okay. So we've got some changes that we've made, and we closed out access. So now we're just going to build this again. We're going to go back to access. And then that shows our message box. Not sure why it keeps jumping behind the development environment. I think that could be a Teams issue. So one thing I did promise that I would show you the difference. So here's the text hints, and when I click into this object class name, it disappears, and when I click in here, it stays there. So this is going to stay. The text hint is going to stay here until I start typing over it. Okay. So what is it that I actually want to do with this? So what we're going to do is this concept of strongly typed collection classes. And I'm not going to go into what those are too in depth, but I'll give you a brief overview. And there's articles on my website that I'm linking to that you'll be able to read up on after the event, because honestly, the strongly typed collection classes on their own, I think, are really a neat thing to do in your VBA code. So here's a typical collection, right? So we can't say what kind of objects there are. So I've got a class module here, which is a custom vehicle class that just has three properties. And in my code, I'm going in and I'm populating a collection with these three objects. Okay, and then I'm just looping through and I'm printing out the three object properties. And so when I hit F5 to run it, it just prints those things out in the immediate window. Now down here, I have the same thing, except the fourth vehicle that I'm adding, I'm not doing it as a class object, I'm just doing it as a string. And this is going to compile. So if I come up here and I do something so that it lets me try and compile, you can see that the code compiles, but when I try and run this, I get this compile error, right? It's going here, and it's when it got to this last thing, it was trying to use the make property of a string. Strings don't have properties, so that's why it was breaking at runtime. So what we want to do instead is we want to have this strongly typed collection class. So now we create a collection of vehicles, and you can see here we're calling this, we're now looping through, and the car is an O vehicle. That gives us compile time type safety, and it also gives us IntelliSense as we're going through. So you don't get that IntelliSense with a normal collection object, because they're just, it's just generic objects. It's not a it's not strongly typed. Okay. And now if we come down here, this is the same code from up above where we had that the runtime error. And now if we try and compile, it warns us that we've got a type mismatch here. So we get some compile time safety by using a strongly typed collection class. Okay. So one of the problems with building a strongly typed collection class is that you need to make changes to hidden attributes. So these are attributes that in Visual Basic 6 environment, you can edit those directly. VBA, you don't have access to them. So in order to change them, you have to save your code module, your class module, you have to export it to a text file. And when you do that, then you can go in and those hidden attributes appear. You have to manually change them, make sure that you set them to the correct value, that you don't accidentally have a typo anywhere, and then you save it, and then you have to import it back into the VBA environment. And it's a whole lot of hoops that you have to jump through. And honestly, it's enough of a pain in the neck that it's hardly worth the effort to do that all the time. But if you automate the process, then you can create it really quickly, and then you don't have the downsides. Okay, so now we got rid of that, and if I try and compile, it's going to warn us that the type doesn't exist. So we're going to go back and we're going to run this strongly typed collection class. We're going to build that, and it's going to be a collection of O vehicle objects, and we're going to call it collection vehicles. And then it just did all of that stuff behind the scenes. It created a file, it exported it, it re-imported it. Here's some of those hidden attributes that got created. Anyway, and so now if we come up here and we try and compile, it works. Okay, so in order to do this now, in any of our access projects where we want to be able to build a strongly typed collection class, we have to, there's a bunch of dependencies that we have to import into the code to be able to do that. So instead of doing that, we're just going to copy all of that code, and we are going to paste it right into twinBASIC We're going to switch over to twinBASIC. We're going to create a new module. Just leave it as my module. And so this is actually two different modules in our VBA code. We're going to have it as a single file in twinBASIC called my module, but you can have multiple modules inside a single file. So we can have a file functions module, and it doesn't really matter what we name these. And then our design procedures. So let's paste our file functions code in, and then we're going to go over and we're going to our design procedures, and we're going to copy all of that code. Okay, so we have some problems down here, but if we look at them, these are typical problems that we would have in VBA as well, right? So we're referring to the scripting runtime, so we need to add that reference, just like we would in VBA. What you're going to find is really nice, though, is this is a much better references dialog than what you get with VBA. So we want to do the scripting runtime. Just go in here. We can actually do a search. We can scroll over. We can see everything. It's amazing. 30 years they haven't been able to do this in Microsoft. And then we're going to save the changes. It's going to recompile quickly. And then we're going to look down here. We're going to see, okay, we got rid of most of those compile errors. We do still have a couple of things left. So the load from text method is actually a part of the access application object. So the access application object is a global object when we're developing in Access. So we don't have to say application.load from text, but it's implied. So in this case, we need to add that reference as well. So we come into project references, come over here, we want access, and we're going to bring in the access 16.0 object library. Okay, so now everything compiles again, and you'd be tempted to think we're just good now. But if we ran this right now, we would run into a problem. It would try and create a new application object. So what it would do is it would spin up a new MSAccess .exe process. It wouldn't set it visible. It wouldn't open another database, and so you'll get an error when you try and run it saying that there's not an open database, and you can see that Access is open, and it'll be all very confusing for you. But you go into Task Manager and you look at your processes, you'll see an MSAccess.exe task that's running and it's hidden. So what we need to do is we need to come up with a way to get access to the running process from our VBE add-in. So that's actually a little trickier than you would think. This is, again, like I said, a question that came up 2 years ago, and I didn't really have a good answer. But I think I've got a pretty good answer now. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over. And here's the website that I was talking about with all the information from today's talk. And what we want to do is we want to come in here, and we're going to copy and paste this code. Over here, we're going to create a new module. We'll call this inter-process because we're accessing stuff in a different process than what we're running under. Now, I did not test this with Excel, but it appears that it would also work with Excel, and there's some commented out code. Looks like maybe they were experimenting with doing this in PowerPoint and Word, so maybe that's working or it's not working, but in any case, for our purposes, we're only concerned with Access today. So we're going to come in here, we're going to create a new app as access.application. Okay, so it's going to grab that application object. It's going to create this new object variable, and we're going to now be able to access all the stuff that we would be able to use if we're developing within Access. So all the stuff, just do command, all of that kind of stuff that you would normally have. We now have access to that. So again, this is only going to work right now. The way this add-in is done, it would only work from Access. Usually a VBA add-in, you'd want it to work in multiple Office applications, but for our purposes, it's an Access developer conference. I think it's okay. So we're going to come back over here. Say we want to just update the version number, make sure that we're looking at the latest version. Save it. We need to close this here so that we can allow that to build. So it could be that I got a little too fast there and it tried to build before Access had finished closing out. So that was that error message that popped up. It wasn't able to build, probably because there was still a lock on the DLL file. So, and this is one of the reasons why you want to have the version number on there. We'll go in and make sure that we're looking at the latest version. And as long as it's still 1332, we should be good. Okay, so now let's test out our, we can't test out the code. I forgot the last step that we need to do, which is to actually call the build strongly typed collection class. We're going to get rid of the message box, and we're going to build strongly typed collection class, and we're going to pass the object name and collection name. Save that. Update the version number. Build it, and back to Access. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to use our add-in to rebuild it. And there it is. Looks just like it did when we built it out of VBA. If we come in here, we can debug, compile, make sure that it still works. We uncomment this code, and we debug and compile. We get the same type mismatch. So there you have it. We went through, and in a pretty short amount of time, we have an actual useful add-in. So we've got a few minutes left, so I want to real quickly show you that Windows development library. So if we come back here and we look, we've got a couple API calls, right? So we've got a sleep call, and we've got a co-create GUID. Right? So if we were to comment these out, now we're getting this unrecognized symbol, right? Because there's no sleep API. If we go here, it doesn't have anything to refer to. So we're going to come up here to project references, and now we're going to go to available packages. So this is that twinPAC package manager that I was talking about. And so we're going to search for Windows development library for twinBASIC, and it's the WinDevLib. And now it's running, it's downloading in the background here. You can see the publisher is Fafalone. When it finishes downloading, the name of the package is going to be changed, and it's going to have imported prepended at the front of it. So that's imported. Save those changes. It's coming in, it's reloading. Okay, so the sleep function is working, but we're still getting this other error. So real quickly, let's go. These definitions are actually, it's just twinBASIC code. So we can go to definition and we can see exactly where it's being declared. So it's just publicly declaring these things. When we build our executable, Anything that's here that's not used, it won't end up in the final code. So the fact that this is a huge, large package that we're bringing in, it's not going to affect the final size of our compiled binary. Okay, so that's how we find out about that. Now let's come down here. And so this is interesting. We're getting this error message here that it cannot coerce type byte to byref UUID. So what does that mean? So we come in here and we go to the definition. We can see that this first parameter is defined as a UUID. And if we go to the definition of that, that's how the UUID is defined. It's a unique identifier. And so it's a total of 16 bytes, right? We've got 8 bytes down here, 2 for the integer, 2 for this integer, and 4 more for the long, 16 bytes total. We come back to our module here, you can see what we've defined is a 16-byte array. So at the binary level, it's the same thing, but now there's that additional compile time safety. And so there is a way that we can translate and we can update the code so that it works with the more correct types. And I wrote an article on that that's linked at the beginning of this. But again, we don't have to worry about that. We already had working code. So, if you're building new code from scratch, it would be one thing, but we've already got working code. So I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to uncomment these lines. Okay. And now because these lines are in the same module, they take precedence over the co-create GUID that's in the package. So it's using these lines up here instead of what's in the development library. So you've got the flexibility to do it either way. So for existing code, it's probably going to be easier to just copy and paste all of your working declare statements and bring them over. But if you're writing new code, it saves you from having to go out on the web and hope that whoever's sample code you're copying is correct. You can read more about this, the project, but Fafalone, aka John Johnson, has done a lot of work and really understands how C++ and VB6 and VBA, the compatible types and all of that. So I trust the definitions, the declares in his package more so than something like the Win32 API text file, which is known to have quite a few issues with it. Okay, so that's the demonstration. We're running, getting towards the end of the presentation, so I'm going to switch back to show you the licensing. Again, this is subscription-based. None of this has changed since last year. Do keep in mind that this is a pre-release discount. If you purchase it at the pre-release price and you maintain an active subscription, that pre-release discount is discounted forever. However, once it goes into the version 1 release, this monthly price is going to go up for both of these. However, the community edition, you can fully test this thing and create 32-bit and 64-bit executables and DLLs. There's a splash screen for 64-bit. Other than that, that's it. There is an introduction of a perpetual license, but it's really more for benefactors to the project, if you will. Probably not a lot of people that would be going for this simply to get avoid paying a subscription fee. One thing I did realize I forgot to bring up was how to run this on another computer. So I'm going to real quickly go here. So when we created this, if you look down here in the debug console, it created this output file. We can go right to that folder and it'll open up. Now let's say I wanted to run this on a 32-bit machine. I would have to come up here and I'd need to compile it for 32-bit. And it's restarting, and now when I build, okay, it built the 32-bit DLL. I can go in and I can grab this, copy it to the computer where I want to run it. what I would do once I get to that other computer is I would go to the folder where I've copied it on the other computer and run reg server 32, this utility that's built into Windows, and then I would just call the DLL and execute it. So I'm running the Win64 version because I'm on a computer that has 64-bit VBA on it, and then that registers it. So that's the last process if you want to be able to run this on another computer. Okay, so let me go back here. And with that, I think we should have a few minutes to take some questions. And yeah, this is the link where you'll be able to see links to all the other articles that I referenced throughout today's presentation.
So there's actually only one question, and I wouldn't take it entirely seriously, but I ask you because maybe your thoughts on this are interesting. Hans-Peter Lienhardt asked this: when can we switch from Access to twinBASIC?
So this is something that the short answer is I don't think it would be a long time before you would ever get to the point where you'd say, I'm going to take this existing Access application and I'm just going to move it all over to twinBASIC entirely. That said, there are, the possibility of doing these add-ins does make it useful immediately. And going back to Alexander's presentation, there are a lot of questions in the chat about, can I make it do this? Can I make it do that? Can I do this very specific thing? And once you kind of understand how to make some of those calls, you could potentially create an add-in for your own company that does exactly what you want. And the learning curve to do that is so much lower now than without twinBASIC. If you're only comfortable in VBA, you can still very easily create a useful add-in that you can put into your development environment. So there's a longer discussion about what it would look like and what things could be supported moving from Access to twinBASIC. But I would think it would be more along the lines of where you have a hybrid app, like Access and web, where you have the web ability. One of the things that is coming with twinBASIC down the road is that cross-platform support, and also the potential to create WebAssembly binaries. So you could potentially use a lot of the logic that you've already got written in VBA to use that and incorporate that into a web front end for an Access application.
Great, thank you. I think that was a very wide outlook on the possibilities. There appeared one more question. What about test-driven development in twinBASIC? Are there options for assertions? And I would like to rephrase that. Is there any built-in support for that, or existing libraries, add-ins, or something like that?
I'm going back now because it's been a while since that's been discussed. I want to say the short answer is yes, and hopefully Wayne is around and he can weigh in on that in the comment section. In terms of the sort of support that you would see in a modern development environment, like creating a test runner, that's, I think, would probably be a community project, and that support is already there in terms of the twinBASIC IDE add-ins. As far as the actual built-in language support for assertions and things like that, I want to say that the answer to that is yes, but I would caveat that with it's been a long time since I've seen those discussions. And I would certainly think, knowing Wayne's background, that if it's not available with version 1, that it would be something that would certainly be on the roadmap and be available. Yeah, I see Wayne said something there in chat. Okay, there we go. So there's an assert package available, and integration into the IDE is on the roadmap.
Okay, great, thank you. A simple question: will you be in the feedback hour later?
Oh, yes, I will. And one thing that I didn't cover that is built in, going back to the whole idea of testing and just lifecycle application management, there is support pretty good support for version control built in. You have the same situation currently with twinBASIC that you have with Access, in that the development file itself is a single large binary. It's actually a virtual file system packed into a twin project file. One of the features on the roadmap is that eventually you'll be able to have external support for text files, so you can treat the twin project file in the future similar to like a solution file that you would in other languages. But for now, in terms of the version control support, there's a feature where you can set an export path, and there's another configurable feature where every time you save the project, it re-exports all the text files. So you can go in and commit any changes that you need to version control. And then the opposite is true as well. There's an import from folder where you can build the twin project file from the source files. And because it was created with that in mind from the beginning, it works a lot better and more feature complete than the stuff that we've had to do to kind of hack around that in Access.
That's great news. Thank you very much. I think we should call it the day with this presentation, and it's time for a short break. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks, Philip.